Hi, good morning. My name is Damilola Jalayemi. I'm with the UCLA Center for HIV Identification, Prevention, and Treatment Services. Welcome to the HIV Grand Rounds for October 2022. Thank you for being with us today. So we will get started in a few minutes. I will go ahead and provide an overview of what the Grand Rounds are about, and then introduce our speaker and get started. So again, thank you for joining us. This is the UCLA Charles Drew CFAR and UCLA CHIPTS HIV Grand Rounds. The Grand Rounds are monthly lectures delivered by renowned researchers, scientists, clinicians, community members, and leaders in the HIV prevention and treatment field. And the aims of the Grand Rounds are to share the latest research findings on HIV prevention, care, and treatment, and highlight important developments in HIV-related research, to also encourage scientific collaboration and networking between UCLA investigators and speakers, and excite an interest in HIV/AIDS research for early career investigators and provide resources about new research findings. And of course, my notes have fallen down here. So let me make sure that I adjust this. All right, so that is the HIV Grand Rounds, and this is 11:02. So I'll go ahead and just keep us moving so we have enough time for the presentation. Once again, for those who walked in, welcome to the HIV Grand Rounds. And this is held by the UCLA CFAR, UCLA Charles Drew University CFAR, and UCLA Center for HIV Identification, Prevention, and Treatment Services. So today we will be having our presentation, and the title of the presentation is Beyond Research for Research's Sake, Centering Equity and Community Engagement to Advance HIV Research by Dr. Sannisha K. So we are first going to go over some groundkeeping items. We encourage you to use the chat for questions and comments during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have an opportunity to answer questions. So go ahead and keep posting your questions, posting your comments during the presentation, and Dr. Dale will address them at the end. We would appreciate it if you also complete the evaluation that we'll provide in the chat at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Dr. Sannisha K. She is an associate professor in psychology and a licensed clinical psychologist at the University of Miami. She is the founder and director of the SHINE Strengthening Health Through Innovation and Engagement Research Program. Her primary research interests are enhancing our understanding of the relationships between resilience, trauma, and health outcomes among individuals with HIV and those placed at risk for HIV, and also investigating psychosocial and structural factors that relate to HIV health inequities, and also developing effective prevention and treatment strategies to promote resilience and good health outcomes among survivors of trauma and individuals with or placed at risk for HIV, especially individuals minoritized due to racism, example, Blacks and African Americans, sexism, heterosexism, cisgenderism, and who are heavily burdened by the HIV epidemic, and engaging community members and stakeholders in research. She has been a PI of 11 grants in the area of HIV. In addition, Dr. Dale is the director of the Mental Health Disparities Core and the scientific director for community engagement for the University of Miami Center for HIV and Research in Mental Health. She's also the co-director and MPI of a T32 focused on training the next generation of HIV and mental health equity researchers. Furthermore, her efforts in engaging community members have been recognized by numerous awards, including the Community Hero Award. It is my great pleasure to introduce you again to Dr. Sannisha K, and she will introduce her topic. This is a great topic. This is a topic I'm actually particularly interested in since I'm involved in community engagement. So I am excited to hear, and I'm sure everybody who is here is excited to hear your presentation today. Go ahead, Dr. Dale.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Bummer I couldn't be there in person, but technology, I love it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Give me 1 second. Are you? Can someone confirm if you're seeing the presenter slide or the?
Not yet, not yet.
Are
yes,
you seeing?
Perfect now, thank you.
Okay, no problem. And I went back. So thank you again for that introduction, and I'll just move forward with starting the conversation. I love quotes, be it from poetry, music, or even ones that I've heard in community and from individuals. And the quotes I want to start off with today was one by Tupac Shakur and also one from the Combahee River Collective. The first one by Tupac said, "The seed must grow regardless of the fact that it's planted in stone." Our stone can be structural oppression and isms that inhibit, prevent, and make it hard for communities to thrive that are facing different isms and oppression. Nonetheless, there is a thread of resistance in that quote, in that there is a must, right? There is an imperative that many minoritized communities have held on to in order to be here today and to thrive. Another quote that's been on my mind is, "As Black feminists and lesbians, we know that we have a very definite revolutionary task to perform, and we are ready for the lifetime of work and struggle before us." The Combahee River Collective was a collective of Black, lesbian, minoritized women, and they were very active in the 1970s in the Northeast region, and really had rich, powerful activism and conversations and deliverables around intersectionality and thinking about intersecting systems of oppression. And I think this quote brings up, in the face of equity and thinking about the work that we do, that it is a process. It is not an end goal like we like to think about in the strictly kind of research or what's going to be on your 10-year packet lens, in terms of, oh, there comes a publication, or there comes that award, check, that's done. When it comes to equity, when it comes to truly doing work that centers communities, it is a process that one has to commit to. And one also has to be ready to face that process, because it is not easy by any means, and it requires commitment, a lifetime work. The image that you see on the right is a tree that I have been going past for the past several months since I discovered it. There's a beautiful arboretum here at and they plant new trees all the time. Anyway, I discovered this tree. It's a sweet sop, we would call it in Jamaica. And what you're seeing there is that someone, when the fruit started bearing, someone stood on one of the limbs and actually broke it. So the main trunk of the tree was split in two. If you could see my cursor, you'll see a line going down, but it was split in two. I remember going by one morning and being so mortified, like, oh my God, you hurt the tree. And, you know, calling different people and saying, who takes care of the trees? Can someone go and look at this tree and see what you could do? Anyway, you see the ropes there and the plastic that they tied up to help the tree to heal. And over the past couple months, the tree has in fact been healing. You know, there is evidence of some hurt on some areas of it, but nonetheless, it's been healing and thriving. And that image came to mind when I was preparing for this talk, because again, there is so much to be faced in so many communities, but the spirit of resistance and resilience and pushing forward is forever present. So the objectives of this talk, in the next 40 minutes, I'm going to provide, you know, an overview of efforts that we're taking on in SHINE, how we go about doing this work, some research findings, and also talking about the different aspects of the lens that we kind of take with the research that we do. One thing I will have to say is that, similar to the quotes that I shared before and thinking about the tree, this is a process, and I would never describe myself as someone who's arrived at a place where my learning has paused. In fact, I love learning, I love engaging, I love interactions, and I especially love learning when it's coming from a combination of lived expertise and other kind of knowledge bases. So it's a process, and I'm here to share with you some of my thoughts on that at this moment. So I may be speaking to the choir here, but in terms of HIV, and when we think about Miami, you know, has ranked third in new cases per capita. Florida in general has ranked third in new cases per capita. In Florida, It flip-flops. I think some years it's been other areas, and sometimes it comes back to Florida in terms of whether or not we're 1 or 2, but number 1 in new HIV diagnosis. And Miami tops the list of new cases per 100,000 people. And when you look at which communities are most disproportionately impacted, it is the minoritized communities that are impacted by various isms that are more disproportionately represented. So Black, Latinx communities, and when we think even within those communities who are more disproportionately impacted, we're talking about the LGBTQ community, we're talking about individuals who are lower income, individuals who may have an immigration history, which then lends them to face additional isms. So again, isms are embedded in why the numbers are the way they are, and Miami is showing that. So one thing that I consistently do and my team do is always center in the work that we're doing, the participants that we're interacting with, the residents that we're interacting with, and thinking about context. Context matters. And so intersectionality is a powerful lens to always keep us grounded and honest. And this here is really just an image to highlight some of the structural factors and drivers of HIV inequities, right? I don't think that there is anyone who would stand and be grounded in science and be able to say that we see the inequities and disparities we see because of individual behavior, because that is not the case. The research shows over and over again that it is structural factors that are impacting what we're seeing with the numbers. And so this is just highlighting some of them when we think about access, when we think about transportation, right? When we think about healthcare deserts, when we think about the role of mass incarceration, racism, right? Cisgenderism, unemployment, etc. So a bit about SHINE. SHINE is encompassed of individuals at different levels when they think about their career, their training, their work, etc., their voices. So it's really encompassed of both graduate, undergraduate, postdocs. We get tons of people are interested in just engaging with the work in some capacity. A major component is also community consultants and bringing on team members with lived expertise. But the work we do really is around thinking about the interplay between resilience, trauma, adversities, health inequities, psychosocial factors, and both developing prevention and intervention strategies, and always centering the work that we're doing through partnerships and community voices. So beyond a question, one of my close comrades, I would say, in this work is someone, Miss Arnetta Phillips, I'll give her a shout out, who's worked at for decades. And I've had the privilege of working with her since coming to years ago. And one thing she's always said in interviewing and screening individuals who are interested in joining my team or contributing to any of the work is why? Like, why do you want to be a part of this team? Why do you want to engage in this work? And oftentimes when she's looking for is, there has to be a reason beyond, I'm curious about this research question and hence why I'm interested in this work. It has to go beyond that. There has to be a linkage to that person's sense of self, their own longitudinal purpose, making an impact. It can't just be an interest for the sake of a thesis or an interest for the sake of a publication or an interest for the sake of adding something to your resume. Because when we do that, we are minimizing the share, the impact, the weight of what it means for many of our participants and community members who are living with HIV and impacted by HIV. We're minimizing that and making it be about just a research topic that we as an individual, that I as an individual is interested in, when in fact their lives are beyond that. And so asking, to make a difference, these are some of the key things that I tend to think about. I think that we have to have clarity on the values that drive the work. So define for yourself, for your team, for the individuals you're working with, what are the values that are driving the work that's being done in your space? Recruiting and investing in a team that brings key issues and lived expertise to the work. There is a saying, and it spanned many different movements, and so a lot of people know it, but nothing, nothing for us without us, right? It is impossible to do effective work without having lived expertise as a part of that work. Understanding intersectionality and marginalization and oppressive factors driving inequities. Again, HIV and what we see in terms of disparities in the numbers cannot be distilled down to just individual level behavior. There are bigger and larger contexts that are at play. And unless we think about how to interrupt and make a change upstream, we're going to continue to baffle with the same things that we're seeing downstream. Also producing real world benefits for participants and communities as you collect data and learn. And so I often say to folks, if someone asks me, oh, but that compensation amount, is that, too much? Or maybe we could do this for the budget's sake. I'm like, are you getting paid? Right? I'm showing up. There is a percent effort somewhere for me. I'm like, other people are showing up and they're getting something out of the equation. So why do you think that the voices, the stories, some of them hard to collect and hard to reflect on and conjure up, especially when we're asking about certain topics? Why is it that we should expect that people should just come, share those things, give you valuable, invaluable information without getting a value from that study, be it as a stipend, be it as resources, be it as services? Everyone at the table should see where they're being valued in the interaction that's playing out for the research. There's a quote here on the upper right-hand side that you'll see that a participant once said to me that always sticks out. And I'll give you the backdrop of what was happening. Essentially, it was an intervention study, and the intervention was being delivered. And she had a cup, and the cover for it fell off, and it fell on the ground and something else spilled. And I, jumped down and was like, I'll help you, I got it, we got this, and I picked up the cover, and I remember like grabbing some napkins and, getting some things and said, okay, we'll figure it out, we'll get you another coffee made, et cetera, et cetera. And she looked at me, she looked straight in my face and said, is this how you are? And I was like, huh? She said, is this how you are? Caring, real, or is it because it's a job? And it struck me because what she was commenting on was just my behavior that said, I care about you as an individual in this interaction. My behavior that said, I'm happy to jump and grab something for you or to make sure that you're comfortable. And to her, it reflected that I cared about her, and it wasn't just because I was doing this for a job's sake. So thinking about values and our approach to research, these are some of the key ones that we center and shine, that we talk a lot about. And we're always trying to do better and make sure that these things are there in the work that we do. Showing up and being present. So meaning that when we enter an interaction with someone, we are there for that whole interaction, to be with them, to figure out what their needs are, to figure out what the process is that is getting done. But beyond that, showing up and being present was a message that was given to me by one of my academic, actually not academic, I would say community mentor and matriarch, who's now an ancestor. And when I was early in grad school in the Boston area, Irvine Golson in the Boston area, I used to say to her, Irvine, I want to do this right. Like I want to be good at doing this work within our communities. And she would say to me, Sannisha, just show up, just show up. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to show up. And showing up meant literally going to events, not because someone invited me to give a talk, you know, helping out to coordinate or contribute to things, not because there was an immediate benefit that could somehow add to a CV, but because I genuinely wanted to be there and wanted people to know me as a person and wanted to contribute with what it is that they had going on. And so folks would reach out and ask for resources or different things. And I would make sure that I'm present, that it was clear that I am here. If you're setting up an event and I arrive early and I'm like, oh, you're still, you know, organizing the food, let me help over here. Oh, you're still setting up the tables, let me help here. So I showed up as Sannisha Dale and not just like Sannisha Dale in training or Dr. Sannisha Dale, but as a full human being, wanting to see the efforts that are being carried out in community succeed beyond ones that are directly given some sort of data. Center and research participants. So again, research participants are assets. Like the image that the person is holding on the right says, more than data. They are assets. They are giving us so much and teaching us so much about how to do better research, how to be better, how to have a real impact. And we have to value that and show our appreciation. Also minimizing barriers that are there for participants, and not just barriers to getting into our door and taking part in the research or meeting us in community, but the barriers that they're mentioning in the context of you working with them. And so one thing that's been a tradition for us is that we always have what's called a community resource document, and it's many pages, and basically we update it over and over again, but it has different community resources that get at issues that community members and participants may run into or bring up, such as resources when we think about housing, resources when we think about domestic violence, resources when we think about childcare, food insecurity, etc. And so we always have resources that we can sit down and talk with a participant through when they mention these things that are coming up in their day-to-day lives, and be able to connect them as well. This goes along with, again, attending to their needs. Like, people have immediate needs that we become aware of in the context of doing the research, and it is not okay, ethical, reciprocative, it's not a good relationship for us not to attend to what they're saying and just kind of grab your data and go. They're human beings first, they matter first, they're the asset in the interaction. Advocacy as well. So thinking about, you know, what are the resources that we have as academics in a research setting that other people might not have access to, but we could kind of jump in and help. So there are many of times that my team, myself, have, you know, reached out to a provider for a participant because they mentioned, hey, I've been having a struggle with X, Y, and Z, and no one has been getting back to me, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, oh, would you like us to be here with you as you make the phone call? Would you like us, you know, to help you reach out via email? And we've done that. And I'm like, you know, some days I get to use the letters behind my name, or to be like, hey, I'm such and such, and I'm at your university. And there is someone who's been trying to get in contact with you because there's a disruption in their insurance, or there's a disruption in how they used to receive their medication. And that can go a long way. And I think that, again, we have to think beyond what we need in the immediate moment with the research question and think about how can we be of benefit to this person that's in front of us. Recognizing strength and resilience, and I think this goes without saying, people are more than struggles, nor the deficits we impose on folks a lot of times through a societal lens, some smeared in stereotype, other things. But we have to be able to see the strength, see the resilience, see the resistance, and listen for it. I've always been inclined to work clinically when we think about trauma. And I remember folks often asking me, oh my God, that must be so hard or dreary. And I would actually perk up because I'm like, man, you should be in my seat, because the stories of resilience and drive and just beauty that I get to witness in hearing someone's story or being in a journey with them through their healing is beyond phenomenal, right? So again, we have to be able to see the whole person and not just the struggles, but also the resistance. Developing meaningful interventions, so things that are culturally relevant, again, honoring intersectionality, and training team members to be culturally competent and enhance their cultural humility. Context and environments matter. Again, situate the person in what is going on around them and not try to attribute what is going on solely to some individual trait. Context matters, neighborhoods matters, the issues that are happening around them matter, and consistently partnering with community members. This is an overview of some of the projects that we have going on in SHINE, be actively, and some that have wrapped up and we're in the data analysis and publication stage. So, and I'll be talking about just 2 of these studies today, just for the sake of time. But the first one is MAGIC, Monitor Microaggressions and Adversities to Inform Change Among Black Women Living with HIV. And I'll tell you a bit more about that. And then the 5-point initiative, which has been 2 phases of a project. So one phase actually wrapped up that you'll see at the bottom there. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about that project here. And then another project we have going on, which we're both kind of finishing collecting some of the data and doing the analysis, is really looking at the role of gentrification in outcomes among Black women living with HIV. And then also I partner with awesome folks. And so there's one study noted here that I am doing in partnership with Bisola Ojukutu, a colleague from the Boston Harvard area, and that's looking at exploring biomedical HIV prevention preferences and facilitators among women who are placed at risk for HIV, and there's a Black, Latinx, Afro-Caribbean women, etc. We also have projects that have wrapped up, and so we're in the phase of doing a lot of the analysis, thinking about the next steps, applying for grants, etc. One of those is a project that is just being wrapped up with one of my graduate students, Rochelle Reed, looking at burnout among service providers for people living with HIV and really qualitatively looking at coping and resilience. Another is an intervention for PrEP uptake among Black women placed at risk for HIV, so MI PrEP. Another is work that we did in partnership with Empower You Community Health Center and their Trans-Liminality program called Writing to Alleviate Violence Exposure for Transgender Women living with HIV. And another is a Step 80 intervention, which was done among Black women living with HIV. And another, Project Sustain, was really looking at, in the context of COVID lockdowns, what were both barriers, disruptions, and also resilience factors that were being utilized by Black women living with HIV. So to talk a little bit more about MAGIC and also how we're doing that work to ensure that there's an immediate benefit that the women are experiencing in the moment from the work that's being done. MAGIC, one of the first aims is to look at how microaggressions experienced by Black women negatively impact HIV health outcomes by way of mental health and health behaviors. And so it's a longitudinal study. It started off with an R56 that studied pre-COVID in 2019, and then transitioned to the R1 a year thereafter. And so it's longitudinal, following these women over time. They come in every 3 months for data collection in terms of they have a clinical interview that's done with a trained clinician. We have measures that they take, we do blood work, and collect other information. Another cool part of this project is that we're also assessing microaggressions via text messages. So for between the 3-month period of when the women actually come in for their major study visits, 1 month out of that, those 3 months, they randomly get text messages that ask them if they've experienced a microaggression within the past 24 hours. And they get to indicate what they think the target of that microaggression was, be it race, gender, LGBT, and I'm blanking on some of the other characteristics, but they could indicate or even choose another category. In addition to that, we're looking at how reoccurring trauma and violence experienced both directly and vicariously, so against a relative or other people in their network, are impacting the woman. And lastly, resilience, again, is always something that I love to center, looking at resilience factors, but at the individual level, interpersonal level, and also community and neighborhood level, and looking to see how these factors are serving as a potential moderator or mediator in the relationships that we're looking at in aim 1 and 2. So the immediate benefits for the women, a lot of the women appreciate the clinical interviews that they do every 3 months that they come in. In fact, we've had women comment a lot saying that, they're not tapped into other mental health care, like seeing someone regularly. Although these are things that, again, we provide in the resource list. So if people need that care, to say, this is how you do it, and we'll walk them through how to get access to those individual care if they want. But nonetheless, a lot of the women aren't necessarily with a mental health provider. And so some of them will say that when they come into the 3-month follow-up, they look forward to sitting down with the clinicians who are very well trained and culturally competent and congruent, engage with them about their mental health and their well-being. In addition to that, the social support, the women view SHINE in our research program as beyond just somewhere they go to partake in a study. So they'll call when it's not their study visit or there isn't a deliverable of any sort, just to say, hey, I ran into X, Y, and Z, and I'm wondering if you guys know of any resources or any things that could help. Or, hey, I'm going through a rough patch. Is it possible to have like a clinician call and check in, et cetera? Sometimes they'll directly call and said, hey, I need to touch base with Dr. Dale about something that she may be able to help me navigate or think about. And so they see us as social support as well, beyond just the specific studies. They get to have very validated interactions, like I said before. And also with the daily text messages that we do, we have something in place where if they report a microaggression within the past 24 hours, they can indicate how distressed it makes them feel on a scale from 0 to 100. And they know that if it's elevated and there's a cutoff that they know, then we will call them back within 24 hours to actually check on them, to see how they're coping, what resources they're accessing, and if they need any additional resources. And again, like I said, we're constantly linking folks to community resources and thinking about how we could leverage the resources we have in the settings that we do to help with advocacy. So I'm going to share some findings for MAGIC. One thing to note is because it's a longitudinal study, we're not at the end of the study, but we've done some preliminary work for the beginning leg of it. So I'm just going to share some of that. This was a paper that was done on the data that we collected 2019 right into 2020, because we started to see some interesting patterns with the microaggression related distress and how women were responding. And we, at that time, because of the disruption that COVID caused with the lockdown, we actually didn't have some of the outcomes to actually look at as say, hey, microaggressions were doing this, and then these outcomes were doing that at the end. Instead, we preliminarily just looked at what was happening with the baseline outcomes and how those related, not to form any causal link, but just to say these were related. So the pattern that we were seeing was that if you look at the blue line here, you'll note that the distress that women were linking to the microaggressions they were reporting were going up around Thanksgiving and Christmas. But then it dipped a bit after the holidays and went low during the COVID lockdowns, went much lower in terms of the distress, perhaps because women weren't moving about as much or interacting with a lot of other people. But then it started to go up. So how distressed they were reporting they were as a result of the microaggressions they were experiencing, it started to go up right around the murder of George Floyd and a lot of the publicity and what was being shown on television, and also the Black Lives Matter protests. And we, again, preliminary, just looking at some associations, there were some associations between the microaggressions and viral suppression, income and microaggressions, and also alcohol use in the past 30 days and microaggressions. Again, because it's preliminary, I don't want to form any kind of causal conclusion here, but I think a couple things one could think about is that perhaps higher income may provide opportunities for people to strategically not place themselves in certain contexts that might increase the amount of microaggressions. Like, I can afford a car, I'm gonna drive. I don't have to go on the bus and deal with the bus driver or the people on the bus or the people on the train, right? And also thinking about alcohol use may just be a representation of sort of what people are utilizing to moderate their distress. This work here was looking cross-sectionally at the baseline data from MAGIC and looking at neighborhood characteristics, intersectional discrimination, and mental health and HIV outcomes. So this first slide is just referring to the findings we found on the underlined version. So neighborhood characteristics and intersectional discrimination. And we found the ones that are in purple are the relationships that kind of point at adaptive features, but higher employment was associated with lower HIV microaggressions and lower HIV-related discrimination. So higher employment in the neighborhoods that the women were living were associated with experiencing lower microaggressions and lower HIV-related discrimination. And higher numbers of low-income subsidized rental housing was associated with lower HIV microaggressions. So perhaps women were having better access to housing versus being unstably housed, where they may be placed in the position where they're going to experience these things more. There were also some counterintuitive kind of findings as well that we noted. For instance, higher median income in neighborhood areas was associated with higher gendered racial microaggression appraisal. And perhaps it may be an indication of what may be happening when we think about income disparity. So there could be higher income in general in an area or next to me, but if I am of lower income and other people in general of higher income, I may be experiencing different microaggressions or things as a result of being perceived as someone who's of lower income within that context. We also saw relationships between higher crime and higher related gender racial microaggressions. There were also some relationships that we noted between neighborhood characteristics and mental health. These were relatively intuitive for most of them when you guys take a look at this slide, but I'll touch on a few. So higher crime was related with higher depressive symptoms and post-traumatic cognitions, higher crime related to higher PTSD diagnosis and substance use. We noted that higher employment was related to lower PTSD symptoms and lower likelihood of alcohol use disorder. And also that higher education was related to lower likelihood of suicidality, and that higher number of Christian organizations were associated with lower post-traumatic cognitions and lower likelihood of depressive diagnosis. Employment and education, I think, may be kind of a quasi-representation of linkage to potential resources, knowledge of mental health, but also being able to perhaps access more mental health resources and knowing how to access them. Spirituality has been a cornerstone in Black communities, so that wasn't a surprise that the higher number of these organizations were related to lower mental health symptoms, although that we know that there could be complex interplay between spirituality and religious organizations for people living with HIV. For neighboring areas, we found that higher education in neighboring areas was associated with lower mental health symptoms for the women. So when people next door were more educated, the women were reporting lower symptoms. Again, this could have many implications, but I'll keep going. There were also a relationship between neighborhood characteristics and HIV outcomes. So for instance, higher education was associated with lower viral load log, and also higher likelihood of viral suppression, and higher employment was associated with higher likelihood of being undetectable. So again, education and employment seem to be protective factors here when we're thinking about what needs to change within communities and where the investment needs to go, thinking about housing, thinking about education, thinking about access to culturally congruent institutions such as spirituality is also important. Other preliminary work that we have done on MAGIC include looking at kind of the latent factors in terms of intersectional microaggressions and discrimination, and seeing how those relate to mental health is what this paper is focusing on. And so if you look to the left, when you're seeing a lot of M's, so MDSR, MDSG, those are indicators of discrimination. And so those scales are parallel from the multiple discrimination scale by Laura Bogart, and then we adapted one to measure gender. And so that's looking at more macro instances of discrimination, like have you experienced discrimination in the context of housing, employment, et cetera. And then when you go down lower and see latent microaggression, that's getting at the more daily subtle forms of insults that people are facing. And there's a scale, gendered racial microaggression scale by Gianni Lewis there, and also an HIV microaggression one, and also an LGBT people of color microaggression scale. But the thing that we found here that was interesting is that the latent microaggression was predictive of the mental health outcomes, so depression, PTSD symptoms, post-traumatic cognitions, and also resilience predicted mental health outcomes. So in the way that we anticipated, latent resilience, which consisted of both resilience at the individual level and interpersonal level. So things like trait resilience, self-efficacy. There's also some positive religious coping, post-traumatic growth, social support there. But it worked in the way we anticipated. So higher latent resilience related to lower mental health symptoms, but higher latent microaggression related to worse mental health symptoms. The interesting thing about this is that latent discrimination was not predicted in this model, which again kind of echoes that when we're thinking about discrimination and isms and measuring them, the day-to-day things matter, the everyday things that people are thinking of as subtle, and even the term itself, microaggression, is meant to scholarly kind of zone us in on those things that historically we haven't zoned in on, but microaggressions actually have a macro impact. So the 5-point initiative, this is the project I mentioned earlier that really has 2 phases. So the first phase, this has been funded by NIMH and in the HIV supplements. And the first was a 1-year planning aim. And so we started off with 5 zip codes and collaborating with community health organization, working with our community consultants. And we would have these events. We have these events in the 5-point initiative model. We have these events where folks get access to testing, PrEP information and linkage if needed, condom distribution, and they get a voucher to spend in a community business. But the first year was a plan and aim, and then the 2 years after that, not 2 years after that, but the 2-year version after that included more kind of ramping up and implementing some of these things. This is an example of the overall model for the 5-point initiative that you see there on the left. And we go into predominantly Black communities with a higher prevalence of HIV, and we partner with venues. So venues including corner stores, laundromats, gas stations, barbershops, and hair salons, beauty supply stores. But we go to the small mom and pop places that we know attract people from the community. And a major voice in this project is our community consultants who are from these communities of lived expertise, know where we should go, when we should go, what times would draw the most crowd, and what to think about when we're in the various areas and how to really engage folks. We also partner with community health organizations. So you see a lot of logos at the bottom, and the community businesses that really become our stronghold for where we go to set up these events and how we do the outreach. And like I said before, the participants get a voucher, a cash voucher of $20 that they get to spend immediately in the business. So it's like a full circle benefit, right? We have community consultants and not just people who are actually paid to play this, the role that they're already good at because they know the community. But we have the community businesses that are also increasing their revenue for the day We have the community health organizations that have mobile units, but oftentimes aren't able to make the kind of reach that we've equipped them to make through this platform. So a lot of them will say, hey, Dr. Dale, every time we go out and you guys aren't around, they're like, where's Shine? Because we've made an impression. And when we go and set up and partner with the community businesses, the community health agencies are actually able to bring in more people, test more people, and go in areas that they may not have had as far as reach or success in. These are some images of our current community consultants. Again, they bring a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and they're just phenomenal human beings. So I want to give them a shout out, Roxana, Sharkila, Kalinthia. And this is just an image of our team. Right when COVID hit, a lot of things had shut down, but immediately when things opened back up, we put a lot of things in place to kind of reassure community members, team ourselves about taking COVID seriously. And so this was an image of our first event, I think in December, either November or December of 2020. But we still kept it warm, inviting, engaging, and also normalized the mask wearing. So even now when we're out in community and folks come up to us, we hand them a mask, we talk about the reality of COVID, how it's impacting our communities and other issues. And we keep it going, but with warmth and love. These are some other images. Again, we're out there. Miami's funny with weather, so sometimes it rains and we have to pause for a second, but we're always there being innovative and partnering with community businesses and community health orgs to really get the numbers up around HIV testing, PrEP knowledge, and linkage. This is just a snippet of some of our numbers. So for FPI1, we were really on the ground for 6 months before COVID kind of shut us down or made us stop a lot. And so we had 13 events in those 6 months, and it engaged, I think it was 677 participants. But one thing about the FPI1, the planning one, is that we made testing optional and not required to get the voucher, because we wanted to see kind of, what was happening, what it was like, and how many people would test without it being required and just voluntary. But for the FPI2, the 2-year one, we required HIV testing. And so you could see that with the FPI 2-year now, we've engaged over 1,600 participants, partnered with 76 community businesses, consistently with 8 community partners, distributed over 61,000 condoms. And in terms of testing, the vast majority of the 1,600 participants tested for HIV, but some who were positive or who chose another health behavior, such as COVID vaccine when we offered, didn't necessarily get tested. Lessons learned, the model works. People love FPI. They're constantly looking for us and hoping that this is something we continue. And we're currently applying for an R01 to do a cluster randomized control trial. The other thing I will say, just to wrap up, because I want to leave time for Q&A, is, the investment is so necessary when we think about the pipeline of who's at the table, who's going to inform the work, and who's going to continue to do the work. We can't do work to address health equities without mentoring, supporting, and ushering the next generation of minoritized scholars. And so that's something that I take with me. And these are just images of some of my mentees and folks who call me mentees when I think we're just bi-directional. So a lot of my community consultants will say I'm a mentor, but we mentor each other because I'm learning so much from them. And just to touch a bit, we also have an awesome T32 here. If folks want to look it up, called the Change T32, and really focused on mentoring both pre-doc and postdoc scholars. And a key component is that they have to have community engagement experiences and to think critically about intersectionality, health equity, and how we do this work. And last but not least, I also carried a lot of this work through our Center for HIV and Research in Mental Health as the director of our Mental Health Disparities and Community Engagement Core. And a lot of that work is done again by Center and Community Voices. So we have a very active CAB that actually actively reviews the pilot awards that our center gives out. They review them, they score them, and I will say their scoring is always on par. And I think NIH should develop a similar model with community voices at the table. And that's just an image of a lot of the other work we do. We do some innovative work, speaker seminars, but also something called Charming Conversations, which is led by the CAB, which is really about having the topics that they want to center, inviting the guests that they want to invite, and having their voices be there to have these conversations. And that is that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, first and foremost, to our community members and participants, and all the team members and funders. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dill. This is a very informative presentation. I enjoyed every bit of it. I don't know if folks have questions. I just want to remind folks that you can put your questions in the chat for Dr. Dill to respond to. But there's a lot of this that is just very important for us, especially in the work that we do, just engaging community members and being very intentional about it. So I have a few questions, or there's a couple questions here while we wait for more to pop up, and make sure that I'm also checking that I don't miss anything. I see a hand clap. Yes, yes, yes. All right. So how do you balance the drive for results that is characteristic of this productivity-driven research environment? How do you balance that with being real, caring, intentional, and providing value for participants, right? Because I think a lot of people do struggle with that, especially in the academic research environment.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance, but for me, it's folks don't need to care about, are you going to get a pub out of this? And so I think when we're thinking about research and how you set up a research project and what's happening throughout the process and the context, it's about what is the benefit that this person is getting from this? What can we do to make it so that they came in here, had an interaction, but they're leaving perhaps in a better position than how they came in, right? And so I think that's how we could, again, first prioritize, like, what can we do immediately for the participants? In terms of balancing the writing and the publication, I think a lot of the lens really needs to be turned on kind of departments and people who are on the evaluative side to understand that community engaged, community responsive work is not a walk in the park. It is not sitting at your computer and just ding, 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 I have some secondary data analysis and have this fancy SEM model. That is not the case. It takes a lot of relationship building and a lot of work that goes into doing this first and foremost. So I think the evaluative component needs to really change for people to recognize just how much work is going in there, and that you may have scholars who are doing a lot of community engagement work and therefore don't have as much time to actually sit down and have all these pubs, but that the pubs that they do put out are going to be powerful, and they ought to be things that we're tuning into. For me, the balance really comes in, there are different people, I love to write and I love to engage with the information we find, because I also think it's a responsibility. Like, I love especially when it's qualitative. I love quant, but qualitatively when I'm like, I get to put the voices of people out there and to say, hey, everyone, listen to this. I love that process. So I try to actually set aside time to write all the time, as much as possible. But if I have to choose, I'm going to show up for the participants before that paper. I'm going to show up for them before the grant applications, because I think that's how we do better science.
Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. That's good to hear. I wanted to also, I'm making sure I don't also miss more questions. I see a question from Dr. Naina Harawa. Thanks for an excellent discussion. One aspect of your findings surprised me, which was higher levels of microaggressions reported by people of lower socioeconomic status. Much of the research on daily forms of racism has found the opposite. I assume because there may be more engagement with white people among Black people of higher socioeconomic status. Do you have any qualitative data to inform the associations you're seeing?
Oh, I think it wasn't their SES that you were seeing there, Nina. So I think you may be referring to the neighborhood level income. So I think you're referring to the neighborhood level income, higher forms of, and I could look back on the slide, but higher forms of migration was related to it was an inverse relationship. I could look back real quick, but that was a neighborhood level variable that you were looking at there. And I think one thing to think about is that microaggressions can occur in many different contexts, right? And they could be intersectionality in very intersectional in terms of what is going on in that context. And so if someone is of a lower SES and other people are perceiving them as such, there are also prejudices and behaviors that are very insulting to people that others may engage in with them, right? I'll give you one that that I think people thought it was be nice, but was very interested at times. I appeared younger. I didn't have all these gray hairs, but whenever I was with my kids, I have two Black kids, they're 4 years apart. And I remember, especially when I was with my younger one, there would be well-intended white folks, I think, at parks or other places that would, you know, chump up conversations with me and then begin to kind of offer me things like, oh, does your kid like to play with such and such? My child has some toys they haven't played with in a while, or, you know, my kid was your kid's age, but they're no longer that age. And I could understand the intent, but at the same time, there was something about it that felt a little off, a little microaggressive in essence. Like, what was your assumption about what my child had or did not have? What was your assumption about my own capacity to take care of my child or not? There were just a lot of things that was laid in it. So I do think that there are ways in which when we think about how people of differential income class interact and how people interact with Black or, you know, minoritized folks of lower SES, it can in fact be an issue.
Thank you, Dr. Dale. Are there any, oh, okay, so another question here. When you, in the MAGIC study, I know you mentioned something about linking participants with health clinicians and with resources. How do you ensure that participants are linked with folks who are actively engaged and can continue to like build that trust? I hope that makes sense. So in terms of course, we know medical mistrust is an issue within our Black communities. And so
Yeah.
how do you ensure that
yeah,
that connection is there?
The cool part about, of course, we can't always control what plays out when people are linked over time, but a lot of our resources, they're actually recommended by our community consultants. So for instance, we're currently updating them again because we periodically update and add new things. And so we display our whole volume of community resources, and our community consultants will give us feedback on, take this one out, add that one, or they're okay for this, but not for this, or send them to this one and not that one. And so I think we also try to, again, think about our population and community with those things in mind in terms of the resources and people we're connecting them to. The other thing too is that when feasible, we'll also connect people to live individuals at these different resource places that we actually know, right? So for instance, there's a community partner who, if it has to do with housing insecurity, you know, I'm like, hey, what do you know about what's going on right now? Like, I have X, Y, and Z resources, but I have someone in front of me and we're thinking about X, Y, and Z. And that's a live person who's doing a lot of that work that that person can be connected to, who I know will help them and are dedicated to the cause. So I think that we have all the resources, but we also make sure that we're highlighting the ones that we know are going to be the most responsive based on the experience of the community consultants and folks.
Thank you, Dr. Dale. I know we have a minute left. I did have one question about pilot grant reviews. I know you mentioned that. And just real quick, if you can just kind of share with us, how did that come about in regards to having your CAB review the grants, and how's that process? I know you said it's a really great process. While you're asking, I want to encourage folks to take the evaluation that's posted in the chat. Go ahead, Dr. Dale.
Yeah. So with the pilot awards, and you guys know, because you guys have a CFAR and other institutions there, but the LOIs come in, and literally at our CAB meeting, we know that, hey, we're going to look at these letter of interest. And the CAB, we read it together and we have conversation. If there's any academic jargon or acronyms to be broken down, that's clarified or broken down. But the folks from community are so smart. They know it. The insights that they come up with, the questions they ask are always so powerful. And the critiques that they have also being on the other side of research where they're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of that study that they try to recruit me for, but they were looking for a perfect candidate, you know, X, Y, and Z, and that doesn't exist. I think they probably got one person, you know, and so they have a lot of insights around the studies as well. And when it comes to actually the full pilot awards, it's the same process. The pilots that make it through and are being reviewed, we take, you know, multiple CAB meetings, but we go through the application, the CAB members bring out their point of views, and we actually score them using the NIH criteria, and then you know, average the score in terms of like, this is what we're seeing in terms of how the CAB is ranking these. But it's an awesome process to be a part of because they're always spot on, like really spot on. I'm like, people of community need to be reviewing these.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. D. I'm definitely going to reach out to you more about that.
Yes.
I know there's another question, but we don't have enough time to take it, but I will respond to that I'll read the question and then I can link it later. But the question is, for the FPI planning aims, was there any consideration in collaborating with faith-based leaders? So I know we have to end the session.
Yeah, you could connect them with me. I have a solid answer. Yes.
I'll definitely connect you with that person. Thank you so much for being a part of this Grand Rounds today, and thank you all for attending. Please complete the evaluation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the CFAR or CHIPS, and we will pass the questions over to Dr. Dale. Thank you. And this slides will be available on the website, and the recording will be available on the website as well. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.